Hi guys, welcome back to the Property King. For today's episode, we're going to discuss which is better, Airbnb or long-term rent. So one of our viewers, Michael Santos, sent me a question through email, asking which is better. Is it the long-term rent or the Airbnb? And the answer is, again, it depends. So it depends because first, if it's a long-term rent, the good thing about it is that the tenant is there for at least 6 months, 1 year, or in some cases even 2 years. So in terms of your security and peace of mind, you only have to talk to one tenant for a longer period of time. Okay, and the risk of the tenant possibly damaging your unit or running away is lower because again you're just only talking to one tenant, and usually you have a deposit, right? And typically you can charge an advance as well should the tenant decide to run away from his or her contract of lease with you. At least you have that deposit or advance already collected. But in the case of the Airbnb, the only drawback is the risk. Okay, the risk in the sense that you'll have to talk to different tenants because it's being rented on a short-term basis. So it's on a daily basis, right? Or in some cases they rent for 3 days, 4 days, even weeks at a time. But okay, the risk is higher because you're again, usually the people who rent these units on a short-term basis are only there for like a vacation or some for business for or leisure activities, right? And because they're not staying there for the long term, your risk is higher because you're talking to different people at the time, right? And from different backgrounds. And you have little to no time to do the credit investigation or credit background. Though in Airbnb, there are feedback when it comes to the possible tenants, the possible users who will go to your unit. But if they just have a new account, and they don't have any much feedback, so you have to bear the risk of accepting the tenant, in exchange for that income. So you'll have to bear the risk of weighing between accepting the tenant without, any positive feedback, in the Airbnb app, or lose the rental, right? Lose the rental income. Okay, so you always have to balance the two. So that's the risk. But in terms of return, of course, if your unit is being rented regularly in Airbnb, you'll have a higher return on your investment compared to the long-term lease. Why? Because you can charge higher on a rental rate basis per day compared to the long-term rent. For example, you have a studio unit and in the long-term rent, you're renting it for 25,000 a month, right? But in the Airbnb, you can actually charge, let's say, for example, you're charging 1,500 per night for that unit. So if it's 1,500, that's cheaper than the hotel that usually charge what? 3,000, 5,000 a night. So if it's 1,500, if you rent it out for, let's say, 30 days in a month, then you get how much? You get already 45,000 pesos, right? So it's more lucrative. But you're not sure, again, if you're able to, there's always that risk, that you might not be able to rent it out for 30 days in the entire month at a time, right? So what if you only rent it out for 20 days at 1,500, right? So you get 30,000. So it's still more than the 25,000. But you have to bear in mind that you need to, change the sheets of the bed. Each time that there's a new tenant, you have to clean it, right? And if you're a very busy person, you have to hire someone to do it for you. And that would entail costs as well. Okay? So you need to run the numbers, check, what is the ongoing rent for the Airbnb in the area where your condominium is located versus the long-term rent. Run the numbers, allow for expenses that you have to incur in terms of property management if you're not going to be the one handling the unit on a day-to-day basis. And number two, allow for allowances on days that you might not be able to rent the unit on a daily basis. Especially during this time of pandemic, right? Of course, it's not a good idea to do the Airbnb now because there are little to no tourists coming in, especially in the cities. Right now we're going to have a lockdown, right? You have to bear this in mind when you're investing for Airbnb purposes. So there's pros and cons on each side. So I guess what I'm trying to say is you have to study it very well, study the location. If it's a tourist attraction area, there's a lot of expats coming in, then it could be good for Airbnb. Okay, but again, study the numbers, be sure you understand what you're getting into, and don't just rely on your agent when they say that, the unit can be rented out on a short-term lease or Airbnb, because not all condominiums allow it. So be sure to double check with the developer, check the contract, okay, so that you know what you're getting into. That sums up our video for today. I hope you learned a lot about Airbnb and the long-term rent. And be sure to make that wise decision. If you like the content, smash that like button down below. Also, subscribe to the channel if you're new. Hit that bell icon so you're notified each time we have a new content uploaded in this channel. Our social media accounts is on this side. Be sure to follow them. And if you want to send us a message for any inquiries, comments, or for free property consultations, send it to rk@propertyking.ph. Again, this is RK from Property King. And remember, let's all grow wealthy together. Goodbye.